Yeah. Hi, Roberta. Hi, Jennifer. Oh, wait. No, yeah. Wait.
No, that is her. She just has the other name from the account.
Oh, sorry, I haven't changed that yet today.
It's okay. We know who you
Isn't
are.
that Jennifer there? Oh,
Jennifer used the TI Sisterhood account.
I'm thinking I've gone over the hill or something. Yeah. I thought, okay, that looks like Jennifer, but I'm getting older
No.
now, so maybe. And hi, Robert. Go
Yeah,
by Robert or
Now I
Bob?
can't find myself.
either. I respond to either. A lot
You respond
call me Bob, but
to
Robert's fine. Well,
Arthur?
Okay, I think
was
I
that a
did
question
something.
for
I'm
me?
gonna leave
Okay.
and come back in because I did something wrong.
Okay, if I have to wait anyway to start in order to make sure we've given everyone a chance to log in. Technology can be a blessing, but it can also be a little bit of a barrier.
It was fun trying to log in on Monday.
Okay, it's on YouTube.
You don't want things to be too easy.
Rabbi, did you have a good Thanksgiving?
It was very nice, thank you. Very low key, but an excellent food and nice time with the family.
Good. Do we have class next week?
Yes, and I actually
Yes.
got to sit down at the table with them, which was huge.
Looks like Jennifer's coming back in. There we go. And I think we're about ready to get things going. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our fourth of the cycle of Pathway to Judaism for this new year, 5781. It is unusual in Jewish education to talk about Hanukkah this early. It's really just a freak occurrence in the calendar that in the introduction to Judaism and this discussion that we're talking about it so soon, because Hanukkah doesn't have a large footprint in Jewish thinking and Jewish practice. Shabbat, massive footprint, massive discussion, very important in Jewish thought. Pesach, can't even say more about Passover than possible. Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, but Hanukkah is a little, it's a little dinky when it comes to being a Jewish holiday. It does not have any section of the Talmud or Mishnah devoted just to it. Instead kind of piggybacks when we're talking about lighting candles for Shabbat. And so the reason why it has an outsized presence in the modern world is because of its proximity to Christmas. Really, with the commercialization and the inflation of the Christmas atmosphere in Western Europe and America over the last 150 years, Hanukkah has ballooned proportionally. But that means that there's a lot of the trappings of Hanukkah now that are not at all rooted within the core message of the holiday. And there's a certain effort we need to exert to reclaim the proper focus on Hanukkah, to not make it Christmas Junior, but to recognize it for a very unique an exceptional within the world history of religion holiday, and to make sure that we embrace it as it deserves to be embraced through its own identity. So here with the calendar, I want to make sure that we can do it before the holiday rolls around. And so we get Hanukkah early in the discussion, which is not meant to highlight its importance, but simply its location in our calendar of curriculum. With that in mind, let's get rolling. Good. All right. The thing to understand about Hanukkah is that there are multiple stories for Hanukkah. By multiple stories, I mean there is the story that most people are familiar with, what I'm going to call story A, and there is story B, which is the story that is not as familiar to as many people. So let's see the stories first, and then we'll talk about the differences and why we end up with two stories. You'll probably reflect that when we talk about the holiday of Pesach and the Exodus from Egypt, you don't get two very different stories. So we're going to have to try and figure out why this is the way it is. Story A. This is taken from that summary in the Talmud that I was mentioning. For when the Greeks, they weren't actually Greeks, they were people who were following Greek culture, but it was the Seleucid Empire, which was one of the remnants of Alexander the Great's empire. Technically, he wasn't Greek either, he was Macedonian. If you're not sure about that, go to Macedon and call him a Greek and they will set you straight. But he did promulgate Greek culture. Anyway, for when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, the Temple of Jerusalem, they made all of the oil that was in the sanctuary impure. The oil was used for lighting the menorah, the candelabra that was in the temple. But when the rule of the Hashmonean house took hold, the Hashmonean is the family name for the people you probably better know as the Maccabees. For when the Hashmoneans took over, they conquered them. They searched but found only a single jar of oil, lying with the seal of the high priest, meaning they only found one jar that was still sealed and therefore was still known to be pure. But that jar had enough oil only for a single day. But there was a miracle done with it, and they lit the lamp, the menorah, with it for 8 days. The next year, they assigned these days and made them festival days for the recitation of Hallel Psalms. That's the collection of Psalms of 113 to 118 that we recite on many of our holidays, and for Thanksgiving, a reference to Modim, a particular prayer in the Amidah, which has a special paragraph added for the holiday of Hanukkah. All right, that is story A, and that's it. Right? That is the breadth and the depth of the explanation of why we are celebrating this Hanukkah holiday and how it came to exist. Story B is longer, and I should point out that story B actually spans multiple books called the Books of the Maccabees. Now, these are non-canonical books. That means they are not part of our Bible, but they are considered part of our historical writings. There are a number of such works that are out there that are written by Jews or Jewish communities in the ancient world that did not make the cut to be considered as divine works, but still are often helpful for us to read, to understand what our ancestors were doing, feeling, and knowing. Some of them are a little bit outside of left field, and you understand very clearly why they are not canon. Others, like the Book of Maccabee, are perhaps a bit more focused on things in a way that are not quite in biblical idiom, and as we'll talk about later, may also have had an authorship that politically was not popular at the time that the Bible was being solidified. So here is an excerpt taken from the first book of Maccabees, chapter 4. Then Judah, that's Judah Maccabee, the leader of the Maccabee clan that fought against the Seleucid empires, and Judah and his brothers said, "See, our enemies are fleeing. Let us go up now to purify the holy places and repair them, to retake Jerusalem, to retake the temple, to clean them up." Then Judah appointed men to fight against them that were in the fortress. There was still a fort attached to the temple area, that still had warriors of the Seleucid in it. And so they had some people fighting to keep them contained and others who were busy with the temple. And they were fighting them till they had purified the holy places. Then they took whole stones according to the law and built a new altar. The Torah tells us to use unhewn stones for building the altar. And they built up the holy places and the things that were within the temple. And they sanctified the temple and the courts, and they made new holy vessels, meaning the different tongs and pans and other things that were needed that the Seleucids would have either defiled or have taken for the precious metal. And brought in the menorah and the altar of incense and the table into the temple. These are all different components of the temple furniture. And they put incense upon the altar and lighted up the lamps that were upon the candlestick. They didn't actually use candles, that's just the translation. And they gave light in the temple. So there's where you might be thinking, aha, here comes the oil story. And we don't have it. Instead, they arose before the morning on the 25th day, on the 9th month, that's the month of Kislev, in the 148th year. Right, that is the reckoning at that time, but in our calendar, that would be 165 BCE. And they offered a sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar. So they get back to using the temple. On the same day when the idolaters had defiled it, meaning that it was the same day they had defiled it, they have now undefiled it. And they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days, meaning they spent 8 days in celebration for the dedication of the altar. And of course, the word dedication is the same root as the word Hanukkah. So the story B is emphasizing that the reason why we celebrate for 8 days is because that's how long they spent celebrating the rededication and the repurification of the temple. 8 days in this context perhaps is hinting at the 8 days that were spent in preparation for the original altar way back with Moses and Aaron when we had left Egypt. They may be seeing it as being a repetition. And of course, also the dedication of the altar during the time of Solomon. So 8 days seems to have been this number of extra special celebration and extra special care because of course you go a week, which is fullness, plus 1, doing even more. Okay, questions on this version so far? Because we're going to do a little bit of an addition to that, but I want to make sure you've got this version of the Book of Maccabees story so far. All righty. So story B continued in the Book of Maccabees 2. It's continued as well as slightly different or expanded in some ways. Now on the same day that the temple had been defiled by the invaders, on the very same day it was purified again, on the 25th day of the month of Kislev. And they kept 8 days with joy, similar to the way of Sukkot, remembering that not long before they had kept the feasts of Sukkot when they were in the mountains and in dens like wild beasts. Therefore they now carried boughs and green branches and palms for him that had given them good success in purifying his place. They were waving the lulav, and they ordained by common statute and decree that the whole Jewish people should keep those days every year. So here we get a parallel idea that they had purified it indeed on the 25th day, which was the same day that it had been desanctified years before. But here they emphasize the 8 days was the parallel to the 7 days of Sukkot plus the additional day of Shmini Atzeret. And so that was the total of 8 days that would have been celebrated in normal fashion, but they had to celebrate those 8 days hiding in the woods, hiding in the mountains because of the war. And so now they are doing a makeup day, right? They weren't allowed, they weren't able to do it on the proper days of Sukkot. So now they're doing a late Sukkot, which happens to be 8 days. And so they want to do that holiday for 8 days every year after to remember this victory and celebration. Everyone's got version number 2 now in all of its detail. Again, all of the detail that I've shared. Of course, there is much more to read in all of the Book of Maccabees. Okay. Why doesn't the Talmud mention this? Why does the Talmud talk about oil? And why does the book of Maccabees, which from what we can tell of the historical record was written close to the story of the actual events of the Maccabees, why doesn't it talk about oil? Why do they both have very different focuses? So there are a number of different discussions in this, in both traditional literature as well as among the academics. And let me just give you a few of them. Most people tend to believe that the story that I'm labeling here B is probably the more journalistic story, the more historically, if you had been there with your video camera watching it, this is what you would have seen kind of story. The story of the oil, on the other hand, was a coded way of talking about these events that had to be coded for two primary reasons. One, the Hashmoneans, the family that was the Maccabees that had led the revolution and led to the success, 100 years after the events of the story of the book of Maccabees, had become horrible tyrants and dictators and terrible kings who were inviting in Rome, who had corrupted the temple service, and who had become thoroughly like the Greeks. They had adopted much of Greek culture. So to emphasize Judah and his brothers and the Maccabees and their fighting as being Ra, the real miracle, really seems to be celebrating the wrong people, the people we don't want to still be celebrating. It's giving too much of a political star to kings that were still alive at the time that we hated. It's kind of like, you might have said, oh, well, the kings were great 100 years ago, but their great-great-grandchildren now are murdering people. I'm not sure we want to talk about this family dynasty in such glowing terms. How about if we de-emphasize them and accentuate God? And how can we do that? Well, if we talk about this idea of a miraculous glowing of light, that is giving a metaphor for what did happen, but it is diffusing it from the particular of the political. Because what did happen? Well, there were a few people who were willing to fight for what was necessary, who were on fire, and nobody thought they would win against the Seleucid Empire. That was a massive empire of its day. And nevertheless, they who were still pure, because many Jews went along with the Greek-style reformations, but this group was still pure to Judaism. They burnt longer, they burnt further, and they were able to keep going until more was able to be added, and we were able to eventually win. So it is a very appropriate metaphor that takes away the political trumpeting of a terrible kingdom. Reason number two is that during the time that the Mishnah and the Talmud were being written and codified and people were sharing the story of the oil, it was a lot safer to talk about oil than it was to talk about the military victories in the book of Maccabees. Because we have already had, at this point in our history, with the writing of the Talmud, a number of revolutions and wars against Rome, and they were not taken well. Rome was very eager to always catch wind of any potential insurrection and to crucify, literally, or in other ways murder, those who they thought might be a threat. To walk around reminding each other of our military victory over a mighty empire that had invaded us was the kind of thing that could get you arrested or executed. So by talking about Hanukkah more heavily in there was a miracle of oil language, it allowed us to keep the idea alive, the message alive, without getting executed by the Roman authorities. So in some ways, there was a very subversive story that was able to take what was pure, to take what was true, and put it into a language that didn't support a despot and didn't support or endanger us with Roman occupation. And we were able to sort of be undercover long enough to outlast both of those problems. Questions or comments on this? Okay.
I know that probably one of Joshua,
Yes.
the king high priest Yananai, I love
Mhm.
his name, Yananai. He, I know that I think there's a reference in the Talmud that he came out and I mean, he was so bad that the people during Sukkot pelted him with etrogs.
Yes. It's a
They
new form of
they
stoning.
tried to stone their own. Yeah, new form of stoning. So you can imagine how they felt about the Hasmoneans and why they developed a story. And, you know, like you said, it's a shame that people know the real story instead of a mad oil.
Well, and the funny thing is, the real story
That's
is
just
is
me.
funny story is the funny thing is the real story is codified in our prayers, which we'll talk about later. So it's not as though the real story wasn't shared; it just wasn't the more public face of the story, and that's a bit of an issue. And I should also point out for those that are wondering, the Maccabees were suspect even at the beginning as the new kings because they were a family of Kohanim. They were a family from the priests. And the kings were supposed to come from the family of Judah, from the tribe, from David. So you can't be both. You can either be descended from Judah or be descended from the Kohanes. You can't have two fathers. So the fact that they put themselves in position to be king was already a bit of a problem. And then it just got worse over the generations. Okay, but let's talk about what we actually do for Hanukkah, not just how it began. The number one and really only mitzvah of Hanukkah is the lighting of the Hanukkah lamp. And as we can see here from Rambam's discussion in Mishnah Torah, it is a mitzvah, it is a commandment to place the Hanukkah lamp at the outside entrance to one's home, within the handbreadth that is closest to the doorway on the left side as one enters the home, so that the mezuzah will be on the right side and the Hanukkah lamp on the left side. And that works great in old style buildings. And old style, I mean very old style. And if you go to the old city of Jerusalem, you can still see some of this type of Hanukkah lamp that is in the doorway, near the doorway to the entryway to the entry courtyard to a house. But most people don't have homes like that. Instead, as we're going to see, we put our Hanukkah in a window so that it will shine out. Because the main purpose here is to give publicity, to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah, to let people know about that victory, that celebration, and that continuation of our light. And as you can see, he goes on, when a person lives in a second-story apartment, meaning you're not near the entranceway, he should place the Hanukkah lamp in a window close to the public domain. So when we light our Hanukkah lamp, the ideal place for most of our modern homes is in a window that is facing outwards to the street where people or cars would be passing. This is meant to be a very public holiday where we are shining the light outward, not inward. The lights of Shabbat, by contrast, we light in a place where we'll be using them inside the house, but the light of Hanukkah is meant to be projected outward as much as possible.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so that's amazing because it's like I can hear my father just telling me all this. And so my menorah is going out a window to the left of the door.
Mm-hmm.
What was the significance of it being to the left of the door again?
So it was to provide a balance to the mezuzah. The mezuzah is on the right-hand side if you're facing the doorway, coming into the house.
Right.
And the Hanukkah lamp will be on the left-hand side. So that means you have the mezuzah on the right, the Hanukkah on the left. It is like a perfect bookends to the entryway to your house.
Okay, great. Thank you. Nice memory. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad to help you remember it. So there was a question from many parts of our history, though, of well, what happens if it's dangerous to do this? And I don't mean dangerous because you're afraid of forest fires. I mean dangerous because identifying publicly as a Jew can create a lot of hostility. Well, again, Rambam says, in a time of danger, a person may place a Hanukkah lamp inside his house. Even if he lit it on his table, it is sufficient. So yes, you are allowed to be sensible if it is a dangerous time. Therefore, he goes on to say, another lamp must be burning in the house to provide light for one's mundane activities. Since in the classic architecture, the Hanukkah lamp would actually be outside your house completely in most places, that meant that it was no problem. But if it's inside your house, then now we have a problem, which is the light from the Hanukkah lamp is not meant to be used for mundane activities. We're not supposed to sit by the Hanukkah lamp and read from it. We are supposed to make sure that its light is 100% only used for publicizing the miracle. We're not allowed to use its light for any other purpose. However, if a fire is burning in the house, an additional candle is not necessary. For a prestigious person who does not normally use the light of a fire, an additional candle is required. And if this additional candle is sounding kind of familiar, well, you're right. That is why we have what we call the shamash, the helper candle, right? We can't use the light of the Hanukkah for any other purpose. So that means we have to make sure there is other light in the room. And that means that we are then using the different light for our other illumination purposes. It's almost as though we are just sort of imagining mentally that the photons that are being used for reading are coming from the other light, and the photons from the Hanukkah, those are going out. This is also why we use a different fire to light them rather than using one of the lights itself. We never light the Hanukkah with one of the 8 candles that are actually in the Hanukkah lamp. We always light them with a separate candle because, again, we're not allowed to use the fire of the Hanukkah for any purpose at all except shining the light out. And that additional candle is called a shamash. And we light it first, and then we use it to light the other lights. Now, most people use candles. Many people will also like to use oil, which is very smoky and messy, but creates a beautiful light. But really, both candles and oil are perfectly fine for this mitzvah. So how do we actually light? Well, first of all, there's a bit of a misunderstanding. Rambam points out, how many lights should you light? The mitzvah is a single candle. One candle per house, that is enough for Hanukkah. Doesn't matter how many people are in the house. It doesn't matter if there's lots or only one. One candle per house, you've done the mitzvah. If you're scratching your head because you've lit many more candles than that in an average year, that's right. Why? Well, a person who performs the mitzvah in a beautiful and conscientious manner should light candles for every member of the household, whether male or female, meaning that each member of the household should have a Hanukkah set up for them. So in my house, when we light, there are 4 Hanukkahot, one for me, for Penelope, for my daughter, and for my son. That way we are being a little bit more conscientious, but still, he is only talking about 1 candle per person. It is only the last paragraph, a person who is even more conscientious, scrupulous in his performance of the mitzvah than this, and observes the mitzvah in the most desirable manner, should light candles for every member of the household, a candle for each individual, whether male or female, on the first night. And on subsequent nights, he should add a candle for each members of the household. This is where you would get a full 8 candles per person by the final night of Hanukkah, adding an additional candle as you go throughout the holiday. So this is the cream of the cream, best of the best, people who are trying the hardest. That is the way we light the Hanukkah. Now, you may realize that is the way that everybody lights a Hanukkah nowadays. Why were these other levels of only 1 or 1 per person used in the ancient world? Because light was expensive, right? Burning oil or candles was expensive, and many people couldn't afford to go through what we now have, 44 candles for an entire celebration of Hanukkah. Many people simply couldn't afford that many candles or that much oil. And so the rabbis, when they set the original mitzvah back in the days, set it so that there could be a minimum measure that almost everybody would be able to perform. Questions on that? Okay. So the actual nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, how does this work? We add candles to the Hanukkah from right to left, which results in the newest candle being on the left, right? The furthest left along the march of candles. And then we kindle the candles from left to right. That results in the newest candle always being lit first. And that means we need to have a diagram. All right, so because it's a little unclear just with the words. On the first night, facing inwards to our Hanukkah, so this is, imagine I'm outside the window looking in, there's going to be a helper candle, that's the one in the middle, the shamash, which is used to then light the first candle, which is there on the far right of the menorah. Day 2, I'm going to have the shamash lit, and then I'm going to have 2 candles. We've got the same one that was there from day 1, plus a new one to its left for day 2. And then when I light, I'm going to light day 2, and then I'm going to light day 1. And to get the full effect, it's time for day 8. All right, we've gone all the way through the holiday. We're on day 8. I've lit my shamash, and then I'm going to carry it. And I wish I could do that with the graphic, but you're just going to have to imagine my mouse being a candle. I'm going to carry it all the way over to the left, which is the newest candle that I put in. And I'm going to light boom, 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 boom. And then my Hanukkah, my Hanukkah menorah will be ready for that final night. Everyone follow the pattern? Candles go in from right to left. Candles get lit newest to oldest, meaning left to right. Hearing no objections or questions, so moved. When do we light? When is it time to light the Hanukkah candles? So the Hanukkah candles should not be kindled before sunset. A light that is lit during the day does not shine out. It may be useful inside of a house, but if you're trying to catch people's attention and say, hey, know about Hanukkah, you have to wait until sunset has gone down. But they should be kindled at sunset, and one should not light later or earlier. This is ideally. There is a little room to light later because of life, but the reason why it's lit at this time is because this is going to be when you combine the maximum darkness for the maximum number of people who will see it. If you wait until it's darker, then more people are going to already be home, and they're not going to be able to see the lights of the menorah. And if you light it earlier, it'll be too dark for the people to be, too light for the people to be able to see. So sunset and maximum people is our ideal. But should one forget, or even if one purposely did not light at sunset, one may light afterwards until there are no longer any passerbys in the marketplace. So once the traffic stops, who are you lighting for? Who are you publicizing to? This is meant to be a public mitzvah. You need the public. And if the public have all gone home, then you've missed your opportunity for publicity. So the time to run the Hanukkah commercial is when the maximum number of people who are likely to see it. Now, in our modern world, people are out much, much later than they were in the ancient world. So depending upon your neighborhood, you can judge when you are still able to catch anyone's attention by lighting your Hanukkah. And it's important to remember that lighting a Hanukkah is an obligation for both men and women. Even though there are certain mitzvot that in the ancient world they didn't think women had to do, this was one that women were obligated to do. It wasn't just that they could, they must. The same as a man, because they too were concerned in the miracle. And again, we can see that from the teaching that there's a hint that there was more to the miracle than just oil lasting, since after all, nobody was really concerned with the miracle. Nobody was involved in the miracle except for the oil. And that was something that most people didn't even get to see because the menorah of the temple was out of view for most people. So clearly they're talking about the miracle of our deliverance, not just the miracle of extra long lasting oil. So how do we actually do it? Well, there are 3 blessings. We say the first 2 on every night, and we say the third blessing, what we call the Shehechianu, on the 3rd night, which is what the blessing we say at any of our holiday and special moments, simply celebrating having reached that moment in the calendar, that moment in life. And the blessings are as follows. And I'm going to do sort of
Rabbi?
the, yes.
You said we say the Shehechianu on the 3rd night. Did you
First.
mean on the 1st night?
Sorry, did I say 3rd? Sorry.
Yes.
3rd blessing, 1st night. Too many ordinal numbers. Yes, so the first 2 blessings, blessing number 1, blessing number 2, we say every night. The 3rd blessing, blessing number 3, we only say on night number 1. Thank you for making sure I got that straight. Sometimes my tongue says things different than my brain told it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sing these blessings for you in sort of the standard melody, but there are many different ways to do it. You can do it in English, of course, if you're more comfortable with that, or any other language that you have a translation for. It's best if you understand what you are trying to say. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Hanukkah. Little thing to notice here, lehadlik ner, the word ner, which is translated as flame here, is in the singular form, again reminding us that technically 1 light would be sufficient, and how lucky we are that we can have more. Blessing number 2, also said for every night. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim lavoteinu, bayamim hahem Bazman hazeh. This is where we are specifically giving our thanks and reminding ourselves that a miracle was performed for our ancestors, and that it was done at this time of year. There is a different variant of this blessing that includes at the end, Bayamim hahem uvazman hazeh, which slightly changes the meaning to mean in their days and in this time as well, implying that miracles are still being performed for us. I personally like that second version, but it is not standard. Not many communities follow it. So I do try to teach the idea so you can have both in mind when saying your blessing. It's important to remember that miracles continue to happen. It's important to also remember that the rededication of the temple during Hanukkah, the actual events that led to the miracle of our deliverance, happened in the middle of the war, not at the end. It's often portrayed in the kids' books as though the rededication of the temple was the end and then everyone went home. But as you saw from the book of Maccabees, there was still fighting while it was happening in a fort right near next door. And the actual war with the empire continued to go on for years later. It was almost 20 years before there was anything like a negotiated peace. So we still want to say thank you in the midst of trouble for at least the miracles we've had so far, and specifically being able to live to reach this moment as well, which is the third blessing, the Shehechianu. And the third blessing we only say on the first night. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lahazman hazeh. And then we would light all of our candles. As is normal, we say a blessing before doing the action, in order that when we do the action, we have the proper kavanah, the proper focus, intentionality, mindfulness of what we are about to do. There are other changes to our prayers, however, but these are changes to our prayers in the day-to-day type of prayer, not changes in the blessings. Those are unique for the lighting. So on every one of the 8 days, the entire Hallel is recited. Before it, one should recite the blessing, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to complete the Hallel, to read the Hallel. So the Hallel, as I mentioned, is a selection of psalms. We read it on all of our other holidays and during the intermediate days of Sukkot and the half version on Pesach, and we do so on Hanukkah as well. But there is an interesting little wrinkle here, that we are saying Asher Kirishanu b'mitzvotav, both for the blessing of lighting the candles as well as the blessing of reciting Hallel. And that means that God has commanded us in order to do this commandment. But I told you before, the book of the Maccabees comes after the Bible. Where did God command this, right? There was no prophet who brought the commandment of this particular commandment. There was no passage in the Torah, since the Torah took place more than 1,000 years before these events. So how can we say God commanded it if we don't have a vehicle for God's commanding? Well, we're going to talk about that now, because it's a good follow-up to our discussion last week about the chain of our tradition. Even though the reading of the Hallel is a mitzvah ordained by the sages, one may recite the blessing who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us. Why? Where did he command us to do it? Well, Rav Avaya said it is derived from the verse, you shall not turn aside. The selection this is referring to is from the 17th chapter of Deuteronomy, where it reminds us that whatever instruction you are given by those who are teaching the community of their generation, you should not turn aside. Do not deviate from those teachings, right? They instruct you, you will act. You must not turn aside, and you must do what they say and not go either to the right or to the left. This is the constitutional authorization for sages to be able to enact ordinances with the authority that they have been invested with by God. God knew that there would need to be additional enactments for the sake of our people. And God gave that authority to our sages so that they could put into place certain mitzvot with God's authority at the appropriate times. Now, this is done very sparingly. This is not something that's been added to in a couple thousand years, to give you an idea of how infrequent it is. But there are a handful of additional commandments that are not found literally in the Torah, but are being enacted nonetheless with the authority that God granted to those whom he told must interpret and enact the Torah for the community. And so Hanukkah is the most famous example of where that was instituted. But we are very reluctant to do likewise for other things. And so we have found other tools to make sure that our community will continue to grow and adapt as needed for different issues. But we do not add in the language of mitzvah, the language of commandedness, to any new cases. Right? But this was incredibly important. Right? As Ramban explains, the need for this commandment, this authority to be able to interpret, that's very important, since the Torah is given to us in writing, and it is known that the opinions are not all the same concerning all of its implications. And otherwise, the disagreements would grow, and the Torah would become several Torahs. Meaning, if we didn't have a chance to actually codify precisely what the Torah means, including things that may not seem apparent, then each person would simply continue to interpret it in their own way, and we would end up with 1,000 different versions of what the Torah meant. And that would lead to 1,000 different Judaisms. Thankfully, we have been much more stable, even though there is diversity of opinion to this day. The diversity within the Jewish world is much narrower than you might suppose. But we'll be talking about the different movements and what they each represent a little bit later, not tonight though. So I mentioned before that hidden within our prayers is more of the full story. And this is put into the prayer known as Modim, which is the next to last blessing in the Amidah, which we recite 3 times every day, 4 on Shabbat and holidays. And this is what we say when we add in. And you'll, I think, hear a lot more of the book of Maccabees, story number B, and story letter B, in how this goes. For the miracles, and for the salvation, and for the mighty deeds, and for the victories, and for the battles that you performed for our ancestors in those days at this time. You may know this better as, Al ha-purkan ve'al ha-gur I see this is what happens. I try to sing off the top of my head without looking it up, and I'm getting my my song mixed up on me here right now. Hold on a second. Now I'm, because it's such a long list of words, this is why I always try to make sure I have a copy, and then I forgot to put my copy down today. But luckily I do have a copy of the Siddur always at hand. And if you will wait with me for just a moment. Just a second. Al ha-nisim, there we go. Al ha-nisim, ve'al ha-purkan, ve'al ha-gurot, ve'al ha-tshuvot, ve'al ha-milchamot she'asita lavoteinu, b'yamim hahem uzman hazeh, which is that first paragraph, which you may know from singing it around Hanukkah celebrations, but it is actually found in the Modim prayer. In the days of Mattathias, the son of Yochanan, the high priest, the Hashmonean, and his sons, when the wicked Greek-like kingdom rose up against your people Israel to make them forget your Torah and compel them to stray from the statutes of your will, you in your great mercy stood up for them in their time of distress. You took up their grievance, judged their claim, and avenged their wrong. You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, the wanton into the hands of the diligent students of your Torah. For yourself, you made a great and holy name in your world, and for your people Israel, you worked great victory and salvation as this very day. Thereafter, your children came to the Holy of Holies of your house, cleansed your temple, purified the site of your holiness, and lit the lights in the courtyard of your sanctuary. And they established these 8 days of Hanukkah to express thanks and praise to your great name. One of the things that I always want to make sure people understand is, as you see from this description, the fight between us and the Seleucid Empire was not about territory. It was not about taxation. It was about the right to continue to be Jewish, the right to continue to practice a life of Torah. This story of Hanukkah is the first, as far as I've ever been able to establish, description of a battle for religious freedom and not for any other motivation. In fact, we had been under foreign occupation ever since the Babylonians. We had the more tolerant Persians afterwards, and the Persians were taken over by Alexander, and Alexander was taken over by the Ptolemies, but all of them allowed us to continue to be Jewish, and we didn't mind still letting them be technically in charge of our territory. We had lots of local rule, but we were okay as long as we could still be Jewish. When the Seleucids took us from the Ptolemies, eventually they began to impose these new ideas that would force us to abandon our Judaism. And that's when we said, no, we'll pay your taxes, we'll let you march your armies around, we'll go along with a lot of your edicts, but you can't get rid of our Judaism or else you might as well be killing us. And this is the first time that we see in human history people fighting for a principle that had nothing to do with putting food on the table, nothing to do with controlling land, nothing to do with controlling trade routes and resources or anything else. just about controlling our right to worship as we choose to worship, which is one of the reasons why I think it's important that we not try to turn Hanukkah into an imitation of Christmas or any other holiday. It is a holiday about not fitting in with other people and other cultures. It is a holiday where we proudly say, we're different and we're going to stay that way. And you just got to get used to it. And that is very much the theme of this holiday that I think we need to continue to reinforce, especially in this modern world where assimilation is so easy. Two more little notes that I want to finish on. One of them is the ever popular game called Dreidel, which is about 500 years old, right? The game is supposed to remind us of the teaching, the legends, that during the time of oppression, our people would sometimes pretend to be gambling rather than studying Torah. So they would get out their dice and be pretend gambling. And then when the authorities walked on, they would open up the Torah and begin studying again. However, dreidels themselves are not that old. Gambling games, of course. Dreidels, no. In fact, dreidels appear to be a game that came from the British Isles. In England and Ireland, there's a record of a game called Tom Tom or Teetotum, and this is around the 1500s. And the four letters that are on the sides in English represent T for take all, H for half, P for put down, and Nun for nothing. And the game spread from there into the rest of Europe during that time period. And dreidel is based on the German version, which was N for nichts, which means nothing, G for ganz, which means all, H for halb, which is half, and S for stell ein, which means put in. And I apologize to the German speakers out there for my pronunciation. And you can see that that maps very easily onto the Hebrew alphabet. Nes gadol hayasham, nun, meaning the word miracle, you do nothing, like the nichts in the German. Gadol, great, you take all, ganz, you get it everything. Haya matches the hal, which is half, which is for was, and then sham, meaning there, where the miracle happened, matches the stell ein, which means you put in. So it maps perfectly into the letters in German, onto the phonetics of the Hebrew, and of course we get the wonderful Nes Gadol Haya Sham, a great miracle happened there, meaning in the land of Israel, which in and of itself reminds us that this game was invented outside of Israel. Interestingly, in the modern world, dreidels that are made in Israel for Israel don't have sham at the end, they have po. They have a pei, which means a great miracle happened here, locally in the land of Israel. But that is a more modern invention. And of course, no holiday is complete without food. The two most common Hanukkah treats are latkes, which are fried potato pancakes, often served with sour cream and or applesauce. Very tasty, many different recipes. If you don't have a recipe, let me know and I'll put you in touch with someone who knows how to cook better than me. They were also very common in other Eastern European cultures, not uniquely Jewish. And it's important to remember potatoes were only begun to be used sometime in the 1800s. They are a New World food, and they had to be brought over and then cultivated in Europe after the period of colonization had begun. However, other types of vegetable pancakes did exist before that, because we learned a long time ago, frying something in oil makes it taste good. The other common Hanukkah treat is sufganiyot, or jelly donuts. The Hebrew word sufganiyah comes from the word for the word sponge, svog, which, by the way, is also of the same derivation for the English word sponge. It is a donut, and it's usually filled with some kind of jelly or jam. It is more common in the Sephardic and Mizrahi, that is to say, the Spanish and Middle Eastern communities, although it has certainly caught on among the Ashkenazim, the other European Jews as well, because they are tasty. And that brings us to the conclusion of our Hanukkah discussion for this evening. Are there any additional questions or comments that people would like to put out? I know we always I always feel like we're just running through this, but we continually finish just about on time.
Rabbi,
Yes.
um, where, where and when did the tradition of giving kids a present each night come from?
20th century Christmas.
Ah, okay.
So it was not unusual in Europe to have gelt, for people to give coins to the kids, and of course that would often go along with playing dreidel. But the idea of actually having gifts at this time is very much a custom that has been brought over from Christmas. I should also point out that the idea of having lots of Christmas presents is also relatively new for Christians. People would get more minor presents throughout history, but the idea of giant consumerism presents is also modern for Christians too, beginning probably sometime in the Victorian era in England. So,
Rabbi, so in my experience, we didn't have any gifts for Hanukkah, except my grandmother would give us one of those dreidels, those plastic dreidels,
right,
that we use today. And I told the story a few years back, and I said she would put $5 in it, and my brothers started laughing, and they said she didn't put $5 in it. She put like $1 or whatever,
right.
But to me, it was $1 million. And honestly, I never exchanged gifts on Hanukkah until I had children. And to this day, Adrian and I don't exchange gifts on Hanukkah. We do it other times. And we never really, it's just not in the DNA.
Well, it's and really that I think you're hitting on the nail on the head, that the gift giving really began to kick off because there was a feeling among suburban Jews, in particular in America, that the Jewish children would feel left out. They would feel deprived in their Jewishness if their friends were getting piles of presents and they got nothing.
Right,
and that
exactly.
could become a temptation for them to think about leaving Judaism. So it was added not just to keep up with the Joneses, but to keep the Cohens among us, to keep them from wandering away in search of more presents.
Right.
One other question.
I was just going to go ahead.
We are supposed to light the Hanukkah at sunset,
Yes.
but on Shabbat we do light it before we light the Hanukkah candles.
Yes.
The Shabbat candles.
Yes, very, very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. There are two exceptions for the candle lighting on Hanukkah. One is, as you mentioned, Shabbat. We light before Shabbat begins, before we light the Shabbat candles, because once we light the Shabbat candles, we're not allowed to light anything else. And then the other is at the end of Shabbat, on Havdalah, right? Because on Havdalah is the formal conclusion to Shabbat, when we're saying goodbye to Shabbat. And after we finish Havdalah, then we can light the Hanukkah, because now we are free to make fire again. So those are the two exceptions that deviate, because we have to make that space for Shabbat. Other questions, comments, or memories to share? All right. Well, everybody have a wonderful Hanukkah.
Rabbi?
Yes,
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. You used a particular melody. Certain holidays have their own melodies, right, for blessings.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they're
So the melody you were using. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, yes, there are different traditions and different traditional melodies that map onto different holidays, which give them a sort of unique feel.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I think there was a little bit of a lag there, but I think we're okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right,
Thank you,
everyone.
Rabbi.
Thank you all. Take care, and hopefully see you again next week.
Well, at Town Hall for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, Town Hall. Thank you for those of you that are members of Temple Israel who live locally. We have our Temple Israel Town Hall meeting. And if you're not able to come in person, please use the Zoom link that will be sent to you so that you can participate in the Zoom forum and still be part of the community for our town hall meeting.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
care, everyone.
Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.